Okay. So once again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, very warm welcome to Signia Healthcare Academy. And as you have already seen, that we are trying to bring in relevant programs at the right time to all our. So 2020 in October, AHA has come up with all the new guidelines, and that's the time I started reading the content, and then I realized, and there is so much read. So I thought, why don't I make it more digestible and easy to understand? So that's what I have done. I have looked at the major documents. The documents are also available on the learning portal. And I have added one more document which is very easy to understand. They have summarized everything into that. And that's what I have done. And I hope you will find this very useful. So there we go. We are going to start the class now. Obviously, with reference only, what we are going to do today is we are going to look at the update. Please don't misunderstand that this is not a class on BLS, it is not a class on ACLS, but there will be reference to BLS and ACLS. So if you are aware of it, you'll probably understand that far better than anyone else. And if you're not aware of BLS and ACLS, you might find it a little difficult to follow, but that doesn't matter. It just tells that you need to go back and learn about BLS and ACLS. That's why we called it updates made easy. So let's go ahead and see that what do we have in stock. Okay. So this is the last document that I have put on the learning portal. You must have got a message on that. So this particular article kind of summarizes all the updates together, and it's very easy language. It is there. So I have tried to put it all together for our nurses in an understandable format. That is what it is. And in front of you, you are seeing us abbreviations, and this is bare minimum that you are expected to know. I'm very sure that many of you know what is ACLS and what is and HA, ALS, BLS, and this COR be, something that you might be thinking, what is this? Is the one that the American Heart Association, when they recommend something, they talk about COR, that is class of recommendation. Those who research, maybe they will understand that better. So based, what is the class of recommendation you have? And then there is one more word called LOE, that is level of evidence. So two terminologies you will see, and this is what is being used in the entire document, that this is from where their recommendation is coming. And there are two other words that maybe in case you're not familiar. This is in hospital cardiac arrest, and this is out of hospital cardiac arrest. So obviously, as the word says, cardiac arrest that happen inside the hospital and that happens outside the hospital. Now, for your information, most of the cardiac arrest, the maximum number of cardiac arrest actually happens outside the hospital. This is positive pressure ventilation, and those who know BLS, ACLS, this is a very important word to remember. Return of spontaneous circulation, and this is actually the purpose of all the BLS that we do. That we expect that the ROSC should happen. That is the final outcome of a good CPR. And I'm just seeing some people. Ishita, you can just admit them. So now to summarize this 2020 guidelines, they have actually got 491 recommendations between the adult, pediatric, and neonatal resuscitation. There are 491. That's a lot of knowledge. But you must understand, 161 are class. Class one means they are really worthwhile to look at it, and 293 are class. But the level A, the most important one, the level A is only 1.2 percentage. It is good to know that, things are updated and there are only few which are kind of totally out of blue. So most of the things are the same things that we have all been trained, but they have re-emphasized certain things. And they have also told few things around that, this is recommended but not applicable. So we are going to look at those kind of recommendations is what we are planning to look at. Okay, so this is a summary of the classes of recommendation. So if you look here, what is required to be is this one. The class one recommendation that you have is 33 percentage, and the other one is to this is class 133 27 percentage. This is okay, maybe this class 3 is no benefit, that's 4 percentage. Now there is 4 percentage which also says that these practices can be harmful. We'll be looking at them also, that which are the harmful ones, and it is good to know. Maybe very young nurses and who are just become staff nurses, maybe little it will go above the head, but very good to understand. There are some recommendation where they say you should not do this. Okay, very little benefit, but what we must understand is the last one. What does the American Heart Association say we must do? That is something that we must learn, because as nurses we do get involved in BLS and ACLS, and all hospitals nurses on BLS and ACLS. Now, always I'll just remind that in life, everything is about from simple to complex. So if you don't know BLS, there's no point in memorizing the ACLS. So BLS is the most important basic thing that one must know. So the level of evidence, when you look, you will see we will get into these words. A level of, that's the most reliable evidence, is only 1%. In the document they would say that there is still so much of research required to really understand what practices are really helpful when somebody is arresting, which are not. So a lot of things have come from, if you look here, this level A, there is evidence. The other ones are, let's, as they go back, you will see that they are less. So you can see here the just give me a minute. My internet seems to be a little unstable. I'll just connect to another connection. Just give me a minute, please. Okay. Just give me one moment. Okay, we're set to go. Right. So what we see here is the speaking of recommendation. When you say class one, it means the recommendation is very strong. And 2A, 2B, 3, then it comes down like that. And level of evidence is A is the most reliable one. Then there is expert opinion, and there is randomized trial. That is your second one, and non-randomized. So let's not get these kind of words. What I'm trying to emphasize is that the guidelines which is given, they are only small percentage has strong evidence which is tested and available. So American Heart Association says that it needs more research around this. Now, just for general information, there is European Resuscitation Council also, which they release some recommendation, but they are not very different from what we are looking at AHA also. So first of all, I'm going to go through the harmful one. Let's try to understand that. Now, many of you will understand this. We don't worry about words which are here. What we need to learn is when it comes to patients with atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, usually, we are talking about, calcium channel blocker. So, but they are saying that these things in such a setting that they should not try to use those drugs, and try, because they may increase the ventricular response and it can result in VF, especially the calcium channel blocker. So here in the setting of a pre-excitation, um, the atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter in the setting of pre-excitation. Let's not get into the details of this, but but the recommendation is this, that, they should not be used. Now, calcium channel antagonist or the blocker and beta also should not be used with patients with left ventricular systolic dysfunction, heart failure. I'm sure that those who understand heart failure, etc., in that also these drugs are not recommended. They are supposed to be used with extreme. So now, with the current recommendations, guidelines, they say it is actually harmful if you are going to use them. So one should not be using them. That's what they have told. So what is the next one? So next one is that presence of undifferentiated myoclonic movements after cardiac arrest. So what they're saying that they found that post cardiac arrest, when the patients come out, some of them they have convulsions. They used to be thought that that is a bad sign of prognosis, but now they are saying don't consider that as a bad prognostic sign, but it is very important to understand that they should be treated. They should not be treated as alone, that if the patient is having convulsions after they are resuscitated, that they are not going to be getting better. So it should not be treated that way. So they should be actually, and it should not be considered alone, because there are many other things to be considered. Okay. So that is one no. I mean, it can create harm. So let's look at the next one. Now, in non-intubated patient, a specific end-tidal CO2 cutoff value at any time during CPR should not be used as an indication to end resuscitative measures. Now, all of us know that when a arrest, either we intubate a patient or sometimes we don't intubate a patient. So when there is a airway in place, when the person is intubated, the recommendation says that follow ETC values. So now in the chat box, those who know, you can put in the chat box that when you are resuscitating a person and when you are using EtCO2 monitoring, what is the ideal EtCO2 reading that you should have? What should be the range? If you know, put it in the chat box. That's a question to all of you. You know, put in the chat box. So, but if they are non-intubated, then don't consider EtCO2 as an indication for ending, because there is an indication to end the resuscitative measures based on the if it's not improving, it kind of indicates that the person is not benefiting from the resuscitation, kind of stop the resuscitation. So, I'll look at the chat in a moment. So let's come to the next one. These are all the harmful ones. So when you are looking at the airway, because that's something that we learn in BLS, and all of us know that they are talking about jaw and chin lift, right? So they are saying the lay rescuers, in case of trauma, they should not try to mobilize the neck. They should not try to do that because they are not trained. So it can be actually harmful to the patient. So they are saying don't try to do that. This is for lay rescuers, not for the healthcare providers who are trained. So this is very important that when we are trained, we should have the right technique. This is very important. Okay. Saying that I have a certificate does not make any sense. Now, rescuers should avoid excessive ventilation. So when you are bagging, it is expected that don't squeeze the entire umbo bag. It should be done slowly, and all of us know that over 1 second, and it should be halfway. It's like doing a adult mechanical ventilation. It is small volume. Similarly, like that, too many breaths and too large a volume is harmful. Try not to do that. So I hope getting all this into your, especially those nurses who are from critical care, this is something that you should know because you attend code blues and you have many code blues in the ICU also. Now, the other thing which is told as harmful means it is recommended you should not do that. IV bolus administration of potassium for cardiac arrest in suspected hypokalemia. So what it says is, unless it is proven, then don't give potassium, because many years ago when I was in the ICU, sometimes we used to do that. maybe patient is hypokalemic, so let's give a small dose of potassium IV. So this is now very important that that for us to know that that is not recommended in the new guidelines. Okay. So now coming back to this is an interesting thing, toxicity of benzodiazepine. So all of us know that flumazenil is the antidote for benzodiazepines, and we give that. So they are saying that administration of flumazenil to patients with undifferentiated coma actually confers risk, so it is not recommended. So in suspecting benzodiazepine, don't use flumazenil. So just resuscitate the person and allow the drug to be metabolized, and that is what they're recommending. So don't be in a hurry to give the flumazenil. So that is found to be harmful, so we should not do that. Okay, so now we have finished with the major, harmful things which the AHA has put in the guidelines that we should not be doing. So let me stop for a moment and see what are the answers that I got for so all of you have put normal ETCO2. Hello, you did not listen to my question. The question was, when you are doing a resuscitation, what is the range of ETCO2 that you expect if you are doing a very good CPR? This is normal range. Okay, somebody wrote here 5 to 10. Okay, let me see some more answers. I'll come back to the chat in a couple of minutes again. So let me see what more answers are coming. So 35 to 45 is the normal range. So that's the range that is recommended during CPR. So if you're doing a good CPR, there are a couple of things that the new guideline says is actually you should watch. So this is going back to my, ICU days where we did not have ETCO2, but we always said any good CPR should produce a good pulse. So we used to look for femoral pulse. When somebody is doing cardiac compression, we will always go there and check is there a pulse. If the pulse is not there, we always tell the doctor, nurse, anybody, you're not doing a good CPR. That means your compressions are not good. And we must know that good cardiac compression is the cornerstone or the foundation of CPR. We should not forget that. Rest comes much later. So please know that what I am writing here, what is going to be, written here is not the only thing that you are going to read and understand. Please pay attention to what I am saying also, because in the post test, maybe some of the questions what I'm saying will also come. So idea is your eyes, ears, both are in the class, and please be an active listener. We have a huge class. We are almost closing 400 participants. That is a record, and all of you are keeping quiet. Thank you very much and not disturbing the class. Fantastic. Now let's go into the changes that has come 2015 to 2020. So now these changes include a review on the chain of survival. We'll come to details in a while. I'll go through it very quickly. And there is some recommendation on the tidal CO2. So high quality CPR continues to be of primary importance. As I told you, high quality CPR means good cardiac compression, and then comes the breathing part. So as a result, there are some changes in the BLS and CPR quality guidelines, and we will be looking at those. What are the changes? Now, coming to the compression of depth, no major change, but there is only two things which they have recommended. We all know that the chest compression should be at least 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Now, the recommendation says it should not be deeper than 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters. So you can remember there are two types of 6 coming here. One, it should not be deeper than 6 centimeters. Also, same the percentage of compression. So when you're doing a CPR for 2 minutes, 60 percentage of the time must be invested in cardiac compression. That means you should not interrupt cardiac compressions for many things. Only time that we are interrupting cardiac compression is when you are giving shock. If you have an intubated patient, you don't need to do any interruptions except for the shock. So what they say is good CPR means 60 percentage of the your resuscitation time will be for cardiac compression, and the compression should not be more than 6 centimeters. So it's very easy to 60% and 6 centimeters. They say not do that, because then the result of your compression start getting weakened, because you are not able to compress or make your heart. What are we doing when we are doing BLS? Between spine and the sternum, we are actually squeezing the heart like a balloon. Okay, we're squeezing, blood goes out, and then when we are doing the recoil, the blood comes back, and then again you are doing it. So if you are not doing it mechanically well, the circulation is not happening, so we are not helping the brain, and we are not helping the heart also. The heart also has to be protected, it has to be strong to pump, right? Okay, so now let's come to the next one. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So compression rate, all of us know, they have told it should be between 100 and 120. All of you have BLS, you are aware of that. Now they are particularly putting emphasis not be more than 120. So during an arrest, all of us are, I always used to say we are trigger hungry. Trigger hungry means our adrenaline also starts running. So what happens when you are compressing? You go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's almost like you are running against a, express train. It does not help the patient. So the rate at which we compress is very important. It has to be above 100, but it cannot be more than 120. So for long time, I have been an ICU nurse, so I kind of always follow a certain, you know. So I usually go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That's the rhythm I always count in my mind. So I think it's very good for all of us to have our own way of, determining what is the rate. They do talk about feedback nowadays. Now that is also will come to that in a while. In what condition you can actually have a feedback whether your compression is doing the job it is supposed to do. Okay. So not more than 120. Keep that in mind. Now, obviously, the full chest wall recoil was a recommendation before, and that is being re-emphasized that we should not lean on the patient's body. So when we are doing the cardiac compression, for you to have the right recoil, your body has to be very close to the victim, and you kneel down. Your elbows have to be straight, and you just go straight down, come up. So if you are not doing that, what happens? Even you are thinking that I'm not compressing, but you are still leaving some pressure on the chest. So when that pressure is there, the heart will not get its blood flow, which has to come in. The preload has to happen. So it will not happen. So you don't want to create a problem that the return of blood to the heart is being impacted because we are not allowing the chest to recoil. So it is very important. So that's why the last sentence says lean on the chest creates a slight positive pressure, which can have a detrimental effect on the station outcome. So this is very seriously being recommended that we should allow a good recoil. So just keep that in mind, very important. Okay. Now, minimizing interruptions, I already explained to you that the chest compression should be at least 50% of your CPR. I mean, we should not be stopping the chest compression. Now, if you happen to witness Kondo in hospitals, many times it happens. There are two things that happen. Sometimes the airway person who is bagging gets distracted, and they start getting involved in other orders, etc. So your breathing gets affected, and the person who is doing the compression, they get distracted rather than looking at the compression. They start talking to somebody, have you called that neurologist, have you done that? So what happens, the compression quality gets affected. It is very, very important the person who is the compressor should be only doing that, no other distraction. Their only job is to ensure that they have a very good effective CPR happening with minimum disruption. That's why when we are being trained in ACLS, they even teach how to change the person, without much of delay. The person comes, right? So usually what we used to do was 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, I'll say, okay, change. And the person is already ready. And the moment I slip this side, the other person comes in, hardly a second of, disruption, the person takes over. It has to be so diligently and seriously done. It cannot be a clean procedure. Why are we getting trained in BLS and It is because to save a life. If you know how to give good cardiac compression, even when you're outside the hospital, in case you happen to witness a cardiac arrest, only with hands only CPR, also you can save people. Now, this is very, very important to keep in mind. Don't think all these trainings are going to, happen just for the sake of, having training or for accreditation. More than that, we are healthcare providers, so it is very important to keep that in mind. The other thing they are recommending is that healthcare providers, we remember that there was recommendation sometime earlier that you start with compression, but now they are coming back and saying that yes, healthcare providers should look at the breathing and pulse simultaneously. So, like earlier recommendation, I think 10 years ago, they used to teach us look, listen, feel. While you are feeling for the pulse, you can feel for 10 seconds maximum. While you're feeling for the pulse, you're also watching if the chest is rising. Look, listen means can you hear any air coming out of the airway? Feel means if you can. So that's why we used to bring down our face to the patients. See, now with COVID and other things, maybe it is difficult to do that, but at least you can assess if the person is breathing or not. So you have to assess for breathing and pulse simultaneously before activating the emergency response system in case you are a healthcare provider, because you can assess the person is really in arrest or not. So BLS and CPR quality change should help minimize delay in chest compression, encourage fast, flexible, efficient assessment-based responses. That means the assessment should be very fast and it should be very uh, efficient. That it should be efficient. They should do the right thing. Now, healthcare providers are encouraged to tailor the sequence of rescue actions to the most likely cause of arrest. That means if you know the patient, that why this patient is arresting, you can change the actions. Now, if you are very, very, very sure that somebody has arrested because of hyperkalemia, obviously, because we know the, your H's and T's of the world, when you look into the algorithm. So if you know that the person is hyperkalemic, so better to do correction for that. That is very important. So, and they should, chest compressions and ventilations are not going anywhere. That has to happen. And the other recommendation now they are saying is compression only CPR should be limited to untrained rescuers. So when you are training a person, and even when you are outside the hospital with the COVID, I would personally recommend not the AHA, that at least try to do a great hands only CPR to save lives, because they say that it is better to give and then not to give. There is enough evidence to say that even if there is a plus minus of arrest and you have compressed the person, no harm will be done. Person can be saved. So that is another recommendation that they are giving in this particular update. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the next one. So now coming to advanced airway ventilation. So once you are able to, give the advanced airway, you have intubated or you have LMA in place. So you are expected to give one breath every 6 seconds. That's about 10 per minute. And we already discussed earlier, the rate is 10 per minute, but you will make sure that you are not over enthusiastic in squeezing your ambu bag, or in ambu bag squeeze. Should not do that. Do not over ventilate. It does not help the person. So you squeeze it half and squeeze it over 1 second. No, don't do like that. No, squeeze it half so the person gets ventilated enough. In hospital, never ever forget to put your oxygen, because that's in an emergency. Sometimes we are too excited. Sometimes we forget the basic. Make sure oxygen is connected. Now, cardiac arrest medication changes. Now, the most important medication change is the removal of vasopressin from the cardiac arrest algorithm. Vasopressin used to be part of the algorithm. Now that vasopressin is removed. Now, that's very important to keep in mind. Why did they remove? Because they found that epinephrine does a much better job. So vasopressin alone or vasopressin with epinephrine had no any better, outcome than the epinephrine. So they have left the epinephrine. There's slight change in where you give the epinephrine. Come to that very quickly. So we are majorly, I'm discussing on the adult BLS and AC, broad, updates that is happening. And in those guidelines, there is pediatric and neonatal as well. So those who are in pediatric and neonatal areas, you can go ahead and read those articles. So the last articles that I have put the guidelines, that one is a very 32 pages, but it has got all the things that you have to learn very quickly. So those who are serious and they want to get into this and do things properly or train more people, you can go to that particular document and have a. But there are basically, if you remember a few things, I think nurses are pretty much safe, and I'm sure the doctors are also getting updated. Now, while we are looking at that airway ventilation, 10 for the adult and for children and neonates for 20 to 30 breaths per minute. So for children and for infants, you should try to increase the breath rate, just for you to remember. Okay. So now let me stop here and let me see whether we got answer for the ETCO2. Okay. So more than 10 and more than 10. Okay. So the guideline says, yes, you should target to have minimum more than 10 mercury. Ideally, it should be 20 or more. So the obviously when your ETCO2 will show that it is more than 5 or 40, it actually is an indication for you the patient has got return of spontaneous circulation. It will not hit 35 to 45 if the patient is still in arrest. But if you're doing a good, very good CPR, you will find your ETCO2 is above 20, and that is the ideal situation to have. But ETCO2 should be maintained minimum above 10, because if it is continuously below 10 mercury, that means the person is not responding to CPR. That is one of the indication to actually stop the resuscitative efforts that you are putting on the patient. So it is good to remember these numbers. Uh, See, smart nurses will know what exactly is happening, and your eyes and ears are all open. Happening on the monitor, what's happening here. It's an exciting way to help the doctor and help the patient. And when you're outside the hospital, God knows if you can help one patient, the entire life you will remember. That's what I carry with me, because I resuscitated a male patient who was probably a VF. He arrested in the church, and when they announced, I just simply did only hands, only CPR, because I didn't want to get into breathing into his mouth. So nobody had those recommendations those days, but I simply gave hands only CPR. We got Doha is a small country, so ambulance came very quickly, and the person actually survived. So I'll not forget in the hospital. Yeah, I have been part of the Code Blue team. So I've done many resuscitations. So that's a different thing. That's a privileged way of resuscitating. But if we have learned our basics very well, you might be able to see when you're outside. Okay. Now there are some post cardiac arrest changes. Minor revisions, they are not big ones. That the therapeutic hypothermia continues to be one of the things. They are emphasizing on hemodynamic goals. It is there before, even now also. And what are the medications that you can use post arrest, and then minor post cardiac management changes. That's all that we have got. Okay. Now let's look at now we are going to get into a little bit of deep dive. So this was kind of an overview. Now we will once again deep dive. So I hope that by the time you finish, some of the points would have already been memorized. And if you have a pen and a book there, just make some small notes. That way your retention will increase. Okay. So, why are we? This is something I really wanted to tell was that in AHA guideline, they talk about a good improvement in hospital resuscitation results. I mean, their survival and ROAC rates are improving when it comes to in hospital. That means caregivers are trained and they're doing a better job, so patients are surviving. But outside, when the lay people are giving CPR, less than 40% of the adults receive layperson initiated, first of all. And in India it could be even less, because there are not studies done in India. So we can imagine that how many places we do have AED, and if the AED is there, how many people they know how to use it. So as healthcare providers, I would only request that one must know how to do your hands-only CPR and how to use AED. AED is being trained to people who are not healthcare providers. So it's very easy to use the AED. So, but at least you should know the steps of doing the AED. That is part of your BLS training. Pay attention and learn, because all the AED machines have similar principles. So you can figure out what are the buttons and you can do it very quickly. So this is not a class on BLS and AED. I'm just emphasizing the areas that we as nurses should be focusing on. So let's look at some major new and updated recommendations. Early initiation of CPR by lay rescuers. They really emphasize out of hospital resuscitating efforts, and the result of resuscitation are not getting much better than the in hospital one. So they are saying that lay persons should initiate CPR for presumed cardiac arrest, not to confirm, presumed also, because the risk of harming a patient is low if the patient is not in cardiac arrest. This is for lay persons. That means outside. So outside, if you want to be a lay person, it's okay. At least don't hesitate from giving the hands over CPR, because that's something that you should do. Now, coming to the use of epinephrine. So they have actually told that you must do the epinephrine usage much early, especially for non-shockable rhythm. No need to wait for one cycle of compressions and then give the CPR. So they have moved it in the algorithm. So all these articles which are on this learning portal, I'm sure you can download it very easily. That's why I put it there. They're all free and you can download that. And there the algorithm, you'll see the epinephrine has moved up uh, one step at least. So the other thing is, when it comes to shockable rhythm, they are saying that it is beneficial to give your epi uh, after the initial defibrillation. So early epinephrine, that's what you can remember. So that means when you are helping the doctor, have your epi ready. Well, that's the order that is going to come very quickly. Okay. So now coming, this is some things that they have recommended is that when you are doing CPR, if you can have audio visual feedback. How do you get audio visual feedback? Can somebody put it in the chat box? Can someone put in the chat box what could be audio visual feedback that you can get during resuscitation in hospital? Can some We already discussed it. One, if you are listening carefully, I'm sure. Okay, monitoring. All right. What else? What exactly will you? You need to write what is the monitoring. What is the monitoring that is happening? Because in any case, we are not stopping that frequently to look at the rhythm, right? That will be only happening every 2 minutes, right? So what are we monitoring? What can we monitor? We just talked about ETCO2. We talked about ETCO2. Yes, exactly. Heart rate is not something that you can monitor when somebody is being resuscitated, because you are actually doing the compression. You can give any rate you want, but there is something else that you can watch. Already I told you, not written in the AHA guidelines also. Femoral pulse. It will be a very nice thing for you to know if the person is doing a good CPR, you can feel the femoral pulse. That's how it is. So you can look for femoral pulse, you can look for ETCO2. Now there is recommendation to have arterial line in place. What's the benefit? If you have arterial line, what is that you can get? If you're doing a good CPR and you have arterial line, what will you find on the arterial waveform? Somebody can put in the chat box. I know we have a huge class. Whoever will answer quickly, that'll be fantastic. I will not be able to take more than 500. That's my limit. Yes, someone can just say arterial waveform. Yes, you will get some pressure because there is cardiac output. So obviously you will have some arterial pressure. Now, AHA guidelines do mention about mean arterial pressures, but they are emphasizing on diastolic pressure. We will try to understand that very quickly in a minute. So they are talking about some kind of a feedback coming, and you are able to observe that the resuscitation is happening the way that it is expected to happen. That is what I would like you to remember. That don't be blind about giving the medicine and bagging and everything. It's nice. Nurses can be more in the resuscitative effort. Many times I have nurses who are actually observing things are going well or they are not going well. They are the ones who can tell the doctor whether the ETT in place or not in place. So remember that during COVID, obviously there is a recommendation to intubate the patient as soon as possible, but non-COVID, you can do a good ambo bagging, with a bag and mask. You can do a fantastic bagging if you are very good at your procedure. So one more thing that is emphasized is that when you are doing a bag mask ventilation, they are recommending two people, one person to fix the mask, other person to bag. So they are not recommending single person bag mask ventilation. So there should be two people, one person. This is to ensure that the air is not leaking and it is doing the right thing. You're able to keep the airway. Now it's very important. The person who is bagging the patient should always pay attention that when they are bagging, there is some chest rise happening. The air is not going somewhere else because otherwise you are trying to help the person, but we are not helping the person. So this is very important to keep in mind. So just a simple question. When I was reading, I don't think I've heard about this in India at least. Double sequential defibrillation. This is actually using two defibrillators to give shock to the patient. I have not heard about it at least. So anyway, nothing to worry. The guideline says there is nothing to support that you need to use the double sequential defibrillation. So it is not recommended. So that's what they're saying. It is not supported. You don't need to. So I don't think there is any need to even study about it. It's not okay. So now let's go to the next one. Now they are emphasizing that where possible, always use IV access, and only when you are failing, you can use IO. What is IO? Chat box. IO quickly. Someone who is very quick in typing, huh? And what is IO? Anyone? Intraosseous. Yeah, very good. That means you're putting it into your long bones, intraosseous. Yeah. This is still the recommendation that in case you don't get, you can go intraosseous. And this is specifically for, children and neonates. And I remember even when this, recommendation was there long time ago when I was in Fortis, we had a child who had arrested, and then they were all trying to find the vein, and then uh, then someone remembered that you can put it in intraosseous also. So it's very important to remember. It's not very prevalent, but I'm sure that all of you are having intraosseous needles in your crash cards. Do you have them? Yes, no? You can answer in the chat box. If you don't have intraosseous needles, obviously uh, you can't do that because it takes a little bit of pressure to get into that long bones. Yeah. So some are saying yes. So good to know that you have those needles, but one has to remember, there is a syndrome where sometimes things are happening in front of you, but you still can't see. It can happen. The famous case of pilot's wife losing her life because the team just forgot that you can actually reverse the person from the anesthesia given. So they were all trying to intubate. It was a difficult intubation. The nurses even brought a tracheostomy set, but the doctors did not pay attention. And finally, the lost her life, and that the pilot became a champion for patient safety, and his YouTube videos are available. It's very sad when you see that. It's not because the best of doctors and everybody was there. It is called the syndrome that it is happening, but you are not able to see because you are so crowded with your preconceived knowledge. This is the way I always practice, so that comes back to us automatically. So lateral thinking does sometimes does not happen. So it's very important guidelines, so that it takes a little time. By the time everybody gets trained, and they are aware of all these things, and I'm very sure the doctors are also getting trained, or they are reading all this stuff. Okay, now coming to cardiac arrest care and neuroprognostication. That means once the cardiac arrest is finished and they have survived, there is a whole lot of emphasis on the resuscitation of that survivor. In this particular, this is a very new thing. So there is a new word added to the chain of survival. I'm sure that all of you have learned chain of survival in your BLS classes. So there is a last limb that has been added. So what they say is that the survivors should have multi-pronged rehabilitation assessment, looking at the physical, neurologic, cardiopulmonary, cognitive impairments before discharge from the hospital. And also they should give comprehensive multidisciplinary discharge planning, so that they can be rehabilitated. So it should not be that somebody has arrested, and then so we are saying anyway, post arrested, very sick patient, no, not to give up that, to actually have a rehabilitation plan. Now there is one more thing which is added, that is the last point here. It is worthwhile to notice. I would say that this is probably the never attempted, let me, yeah, this one. This is the one. What they are talking about, recommend structured assessment for anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, fatigue of for cardiac arrest survivors is one thing. This is what their caregivers. This is also important to have to know that the people who are giving care to them, in their caregivers, why not the nurses and the doctors who were part of that resuscitation. Sometimes there are many times in my life where I have cried after losing patient, because I feel we should not have lost the patient, but we lost the patient, then we end up crying. We are under stress, but we take it by our stride. Usually nobody talks to us, and maximum we may talk to each other, but this is now become a part of focus in the new guideline. So this is something that you can keep in mind. Yep, great. So I hope so far so good. So let's move forward. One second, my screen seems to be okay. Now, debriefings for rescuers. This is also another point that is coming up in the debriefings are referral for follow-up for emotional support for lay rescuers. I already told you that. EMS providers, hospital-based healthcare workers after a cardiac arrest event may be beneficial. They're not saying that it is mandatory, but debriefings should involve at least a dialogue with them, that how do you feel? Do you think that we did all? Sometimes it is very important for someone to just say that I felt so lost inside the cardiac arrest team. I felt lost, I don't know what I was doing. That's very important, otherwise people will carry these emotions with them. So as nursing, as nurses, I'm not going to get into your code blue team or your process. My request will be for the senior people who are here, do have a nursing debrief. When the nurses have been involved in cardiac arrest and they have been in resuscitation, take 2 minutes, talk to them. How did they feel? They felt they were useful, or was there something like? I'm very sure that code blue review will happen. Not about that. This is about giving emotional support to the people who are involved in resuscitating. Even outside, if a lay person has to resuscitate someone, it could be a huge toll on them. They will, if the patient is not surviving, feel very guilty to say, did I do something wrong? That's why the person, or they may be totally devastated, they are tired, somebody else to help them. So it can happen with lay rescuers, EMS providers, and all of us in the hospital also. Coming to cardiac arrest in pregnancy, because that's an entire different focus. There is cardiac arrest in pregnancy. There's the entire, page is dedicated to cardiac arrest in pregnancy. So I'm just going to go through some of the recommendations which are there very quickly. Is that because the pregnant ladies are more prone to hypoxia. That's what we should remember. The pregnant patients are more prone to hypoxia. So there the need for maintaining oxygenation and airway management should be prioritized compared to other non-pregnant victims. So that's something you need to remember. If you're the pregnant lady, airway has to get in, oxygenation has to happen because there are two lives. Okay, so they are at risk. That is something they're emphasizing. And because of potential interference with maternal resuscitation, fetal monitoring should not be undertaken during cardiac arrest pregnancy. So that's what they are saying, that you are trying to resuscitate the mother. During that time, you don't need to worry about doing fetal monitoring during that particular time. Then, very clearly, they are saying targeted temperature management. This is TTM, and it was there before also, but specifically, they are talking about TTM for pregnant women. So, I just want to ask the people who are in the class, do you have this protocol in your hospital, TTM, or keeping the cooler in simple terms, keeping the patient cooler after the arrest? Chat box, anyone? Do you have uh, protocol for temperature maintenance, because this is one of the recommendation had been there for a while in the post arrest care. Okay, let me just see, somebody has put in the chat box. Okay, no. Okay, maybe this is something you may like to go back and discuss with your intensivist code blue team, to say what is our targeted temperature management post arrest when the person survives. There is a recommendation for maintaining the temperature. Actually, you actually keep the patient cooler because there you want to bring their metabolic rate down. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but it is good to know. For pregnancy, it is even more emphasized. During the targeted temperature management of a pregnant patient, it is recommended during that time the fetus is continuously monitored, because bradycardia can happen. So, obstetric and neonatal consultation should be sought. That means they should be involved in this. So, during resuscitation of a pregnant lady, don't worry about the fetal monitoring, but post that, the fetal monitoring should happen along with the mother. So, it's very easy to remember that way. Okay. All right. Let's come to the next one. So now they beautiful, visual aids are available and they are free. They can be downloaded. So you should be able to go to the site and download these things. That the sixth link, as I told you. So earlier the links used to be from here till here. This was the link. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this was early recognition and prevention. That was the first one. So whether in hospital or outside hospital, activation of EMS. So inside the hospital, it will be activation of your emergency team. High quality CPR to start immediately. So the nurses who are at the bedside, that's where everybody is trained in BLS. So you can start this without delay. Then get your defibrillation ED or your defibrillator. There is also a recommendation that if the hospital, especially in non-critical areas, the defibrillators, AD pads could be used. How many of you use AD pads during defibrillation in your hospital as part of the Full Blue? That is a recommendation, because what happens when the AED will prompt you whether it is required, not required, and it will also prompt you that when. Um, so let's see. Do we have some answers there? Okay. Some are saying yes and no. And if you don't have AED, then one must really know how to use the defibrillator, how to analyze the rhythm. So that's why it is very important that, in ACLS, that the focus is on, fatal arrhythmia. That is very important for all nurses to know. So defibrillator early defibrillation, and then post cardiac care. So this used to be the chain of survival. Now the last limb that is added is called the recovery. As we discussed, care has to extend into discharge, into rehabilitation. So that's why the recovery is there. Whether it is in hospital cardiac arrest or the outside hospital cardiac arrest, in hospital, this is how it is, the early recognition, activation of EMS. Now, when it comes to out hospital, the only difference is you activate the EMS first. If you are alone, you activate the emergency medical system. Whatever is the number that you need to reach out, you call that first, not start the recognition part. Unresponsive, call for help, call EMS, then start the high quality CPR defibrillation. The rest of the chain continues to be the same. Yeah. So that is about all these algorithms. These charts are very easily available on the website of AHA. You can download them and not an issue at all. So as I told you that in the algorithm for adult resuscitation, the epinephrine has moved up. So if you can look here, this is non-shockable rhythm. So where is my pen? Let me come here. Okay. So when a person is arresting, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. This is not a ACLS class, but still I'm little inclined to use this time to very quickly brief you to that. So what you do, start CPR, give oxygen, attach monitor or defibrillator. What they are saying, do that. Okay. Now, when you attach the monitor or defibrillator, you will see a rhythm. So if the rhythm is shockable, if it is yes, obviously you shock the person. When that person is having a rhythm which is not shockable, like asystole or PEA, the first recommendation is to give epinephrine. So you can see here the limb, and this is the most critical algorithm because here the patient is gone. So how well you do the resuscitation, how well you follow the algorithm is very important whether the person can come back. So you have given epinephrine as soon as possible. And every 3 to 5 minutes, you are also doing epinephrine. And then here you consider advanced airway and capnography, that all you understand. Then you again go back to, looking at the rhythm shockable or not shockable, continue that cycle. Coming back to this shockable rhythm, you have given the shock, and one thing you must remember that immediately after giving shock, what is action that you have to do? Immediately after giving the shock, what is the first thing that you have to do? Can somebody put in the chat box? These are some things that one must not forget at all. You know, it's like where to place your hands and what is the position to be taken. These are some things that you should not forget. Yeah, very good. Multiple people told CPR. Yeah, very specifically, start compression. That's very important. No stopping after giving shock to see, whether the pulse is there or the rhythm is there. One should not stop. Many years ago, when I was in ICU, those days, at times, yes, we had used a algorithm where we used to give the shock, and I'm talking about many years ago. We'll give the shock and we will check what happened. Doctor will also shock. What's the rhythm? So right now it says don't wait. Don't wait to see the rhythm. Don't wait anything. Give the shock and immediately start the cardiac compression. And then after 2 minutes only you. So that is very, very important. Then here again you continue to check if the rhythm is shockable. So you have given one shock here and you continued the CPR and 2 minutes, and then when you are checking that time you check the pulse and the rhythm, and the rhythm is still shockable, give the shock, and then you are starting to give. Okay, so that's how not much. This is the major change here, that you should give epinephrine as early as possible. That's the change that has happened. Now, if you look at few charts just to kind of, these are all taken from the recommendations only, is that you can see here this one, your epinephrine is COR is 1. Okay, category of recommendation is 1. So recommend that epinephrine be administered for patients in cardiac arrest, as I just now. Okay, so that is your 1. So I'm not going to go through all this. I'm going to look at this. That 2B category, limited evidence, but the vasopressin alone or vasopressin in combination with epinephrine may be considered in cardiac arrest, but offers no advantage as a substitute for epinephrine. So that has removed. Now, high dose epinephrine is not recommended for routine use in cardiac arrest. This is of no benefit. Sometimes what happens when there is cardiac arrest, some of our clinician friends are so excited, they go on ordering for epi, atropine, this, that, without even looking at the algorithm, because it's very clear that when to administer, when to stop, when to check. So giving too much epinephrine is not recommended. It's known as no benefit. Okay. So let's look at some algorithms now. I have taken I'm trying to move it somewhere so that, does not obstruct my view. We still have people. So this is about the basic life support. I just brought this up here only to emphasize the fact that, especially when patient is arrested in a particular bed, you have gone to the bedside and you are seeing the person is unresponsive. The first thing is to shout for help and activate emergency response system. So whether it in the hospital you press a button or you call somebody, but you have to get the AED or the defibrillator very quickly, because that's something that has to keep in mind. Patient is in hospital and there is delay in getting the defibrillator means that is little sad. That should not happen. Inside the hospital, patient should have the benefit of getting the defibrillator without delay. So that's very important. So to us, that is very important. Your crash cart is checked well, and the defibrillators are checked in every shift that they are working. If there are pads, they are clean. Many times the defibrillator has got adult and pediatric pads together, and sometimes our nurses clean those paddles and they just put with inside, and there's a lot of jelly sitting there. So what happens for no reason, the shock does not do the work it's supposed to do. So minor things, but it has impact. You will not see them in the guidelines because nobody is studying those things, unless it is studied that, how many times you found cardiac, defibrillator paddles are with a lot of jelly. It was not dried, then you will come to know that there is a problem because we never looked at it. I'm talking about this from my own experience, because I'm a critical care nurse. I had this habit of taking the paddle and removing that, that pediatric one out. When that comes out, I'll see that there's a lot of gel. So unless somebody is focusing, the paddles will not do the work it is supposed to do. We will say, okay, this many shock delivery, but we don't know where the shock is gone. Has it even too much jelly, it can cause a different circuit. We know that, the gel between the apex and the your this I'm I'm forgetting the word, apex and the scapula, the paddles, if there is too much jelly, the shock just travels between the two paddles, does not go. So these are things that one must remember. It is same like, wherever jelly is left, that it will not do the right work. Same for your ECG machine also. So just to keep those things in mind. It's very important that we remember these things. Now, in the algorithm, what has happened is that in the new recommendation, they have added two new algorithms which are related to associated emergency algorithm. That means you find somebody who is having opioid overdose. All of us know what is opioids. So if there is an overdose that is required, so there are two algorithms that is created by AHA, time, that is for lay rescuers and trained rescuers. So here, initially the same thing happens, something like that. The check for responsiveness, shout for help, activate. But when you are suspecting your opioid overdose, what is recommended now is to get naloxone. Naloxone has come early in the cycle. You can see here, get naloxone. And if the person is breathing normally, yes or no? If the person is breathing normally, tap and shout, reposition, consider naloxone. Continue to observe until the emergency. This is for the lay rescuers when you are outside. Okay, can you see lay responders? Okay, so naloxone, even a sick person can give nasal spray naloxone or IV also. So it is actually said okay. I don't think in India it can happen. But if the person is not breathing, again, go to the same CPR, but again, there is naloxone recommended there. So that's something new because at least when I did ACLS, this algorithm was not there. So for patients known or suspected to be in cardiac arrest, the absence of a proven benefit from use of naloxone, standard resuscitative measures should be taken priority over naloxone administration. So that is updated to say that when the person is in cardiac arrest, naloxone is not the priority to be given, but give good quality CPR. That is very important. That needs to be kept in mind. Okay. Now coming back to the healthcare providers algorithm for opioid suspected opioid overdose. Just give me a minute. I am trying to out of the way. So here, this is for healthcare providers. So what are we trying to do? Let all these people there. So again, check for responsiveness, shout for help, and get AED and get naloxone. It remains the same. And the person breathing, do the same thing. And when the person is not breathing, does the have a pulse? A lay rescuer is not stopping to check for pulse. That's the difference. Healthcare providers, they stop to check for the pulse, and then if there is no pulse, then start CPR. Consider. Okay, so that is and once you have given the CPR and you have started the airway, then they are talking about giving naloxone. So there is naloxone in the algorithm, okay, but it is not mandatory to give that first. It is recommended that the CPR should happen first. The CPR, that means the chest compressions and ventilation, because these patients could be hypoventilating because of opioid overdose. So it is better to take care of their hypoventilation, giving naloxone first. So we are losing time to resuscitate the person. So that is the focus of this particular guideline. Yep. Okay, so that comes to that. And so bag mask ventilation, rescue breathing is what they are talking about because opioid poisoning, they could have respiratory arrest even before cardiac arrest. So their respiration. So that's why they say when you are resuscitating person, based on the reason known to you, you can decide what is to be done. Okay. So that is your two new cardiac arrest algorithms which are added. The post cardiac arrest care algorithm updated to emphasize the need to prevent. There are three H that they are talking about. Just remember that: hyperoxia, hypoxemia, and hypotension. Now, too much of oxygen, too little oxygen, both are not recommended after the resuscitation. So you have to titrate your oxygen very quickly because you don't want the person to have oxygen toxicity post resuscitation. So it leads to complications. So they are now emphasizing on this fact that three H should be taken care of: hyperoxia, hypoxemia, and hypotension. So this is very important. So this cardiac arrest algorithm is also available in that document. So I have taken all of it from those documents. So if you just read this and if you can train your people that these are the most important things. So here you can see that it is talking about targeted temperature management, continuous. So this was there before also, where you talk about, if patient is not following commands, and this is TTM is actually for those patients who are not becoming conscious after your resuscitation. That's the time. So your temperature maintenance is between 32 to 36 degree for first 24 hours by using cooling device. So your cooling blankets are available in OT. So that is where this TTM is there. So if you don't have a written protocol, then obviously you will be using This is for those patients who are unconscious. And now, apart from that, we already learned for pregnant patient, there is definite recommendation to cool the person after the arrest because there is another life inside them. That is the fetus. So you need to take care of that also. Okay, great. So this is a very good, chart that is available there. So in case this is actually the post-arrest, multi-modal prognostication. It's a very tough word. Doesn't come in the mouth also completely. So they're talking about clinical management. That means targeted temperature management as soon as possible. Then after 24 hours, you start to rewarm the person, sedation, analgesics, so that you can have controlled normothermia. Don't over medicate the person. Then CT scan, MRI to check how is your neuro thing going. Then doing an electrophysiology study. So these are all the things that they're talking about to see that how the brain is behaving after the resuscitation. So there could be lab test. There are many things which are there. I'm not going to get into that to see whether person has suffered any neurological damage. So the recommendation is that if they develop convulsion, don't assume that they have become vegetative. That is the uh, big idea here, that you have to continue to support them, treat them for anticonvulsants, but then continue to monitor their neurological status and try to rehabilitate them. Don't say that post arrest, the person is gone. So that is recommended in the new guidelines. Okay. Now coming to pregnancy algorithm, which I have already told you. So this is also there, the special cases we already discussed that. So it is written here, all the things that is required. See, I would request all of you to, wherever you're working, suppose you are not working in a maternity center, then don't worry about this, but focus on the adult, BLS and ACLS algorithm. Suppose you're working in pediatric or neonatal, everything has got an algorithm. This is actually the entire pages written in stories is actually summarized into one sheet. And this is one place you can learn everything very quickly. So I would recommend that, whether you're going for BLS and ACLS classes or not, always have this, because in the ACLS class also they ask you to go through the algorithm. Now I would like you to look at this. I'm going to show that in a larger scale. You have it here, that potential etiology of maternal cardiac arrest, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Okay, the potential reason. The other one has got 5H and 5Ts in adult cardiac arrest. In pregnancy, it is A, B, C, D, E, F. So I thought it may be nice. So now the next section is all my bonus section. Thank you for being here. In case you are hard pressed for time, I will not complain if you leave the class, because this is what I wanted to share with you till here. But I'm going to go ahead, and I have added some more knowledge over here, that, that's my last half an hour, some more. That I call it as bonus information. So if you stay back, you're going to listen to the bonus section as well. Okay, let's get into that. So causes and treatment. Causes of arrest can be many. So we know about, okay, hypothermia, hypovolemia, hypoxia, acidosis, so hydrogen imbalance, hypo or hyperkalemia, hypoglycemia, hypothermia. So these are some of the things one can keep in mind when somebody is arrested. Are they the reason for someone to get into this problem? And post arrest, good to run through this checklist to see now at this moment what is the problem patient having. So when you do the ABG post arrest, you have to look for hypoxia, your pH, is the patient in acidosis, what is the potassium looking like, look for a blood sugar. So this there are, instead of 5 there are 6H here, a good list for us to remember. So if you remember that, you can actually go to that. The other things are the 5Ts, which are toxins. You have to treat that particular toxin. You should know the antidote. Tamponade, pericardial tamponade. So there you have to do a pericardial purposes. If you don't do that, the arrest is not going anywhere else, okay? Or tension pneumothorax. If you know this reason, you have to take care of that reason first. Know the patient, for example, patient had chest tube put or a central line inserted, and within minutes the patient became very sick. Patient became pale, and suddenly you see patient has gone into PEA. That means the electrical activity is coming, but there is no pulse. You must think of tension pneumothorax. And let me tell you, in my ICU, at least 3 times, our nurses have put the needle in the first, intercostal space, and we just put. You can hear the air coming out. The nurses were that good. They there you don't need to do compression, all that stuff. You just have to relieve the pneumothorax. So knowledge is very important, but it's very important to know when to apply and how to. So these things are for ICU settings. Otherwise, at least the nurse can tell that the patient had a recent, event that happened. So what happens? Let's say the patient had a procedure, ICD insertion or a central line insertion in the ward. Soon after that, patient arrested. Who is going to tell the code blue team that the central line was just placed so the doctors can, oh, this could be. Otherwise, you have a tension pneumothorax and you are trying to compress the heart and trying to revive the person. The person will not get revived. You have to relieve the tension pneumothorax. So when it comes to tension pneumothorax, this is something that I've seen with my own eyes. So it's very important. There is a part in Code Blue where a nurse who is looking after the patient is expected to brief the team. When the team comes, you have to tell very quickly, this is 48-year-old male admitted yesterday with blah, 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 blah. The central line was just inserted and within 10 minutes, this is what has happened. So the Code Blue team, they know exactly what is to be done. So you're giving an indication. You are not, even if you don't say tension pneumothorax, I'm sure the good doctors will think that this is a complication of that. So you can actually save patient when you have this knowledge. And then thrombosis, if there is a pulmonary embolism or a myocardial infarction, they have a different set of guidelines available. Today we were only talking about the BLS and AC updates. So in the document, all these recommendations are also there. Then of course, when there is trauma, you need to find out what is the trauma, what is the surgical evaluation, what can be done for the patient. So it is not just doing a CPR for every patient and not knowing what could be. So the moment you start the CPR, you're also thinking what could be the cause. So the 5H, the 5Ts can be kept in mind, which are the most common reasons for cardiac arrest. So this is the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. I just made it larger here. See, anesthetic complication, bleeding, cardiovascular problems, drugs, embolic fever. Now this is your mnemonic. Yes, this is a mnemonic, not a acronym. It's a mnemonic. Okay. So this mnemonic, if you remember, so you can kind of think and keep your H and T's also in mind. But for maternal, for mother, pregnant lady, arresting, keep all this also in mind. Okay. Now I just pull this up. So if you go to this is the website from where you can get all kinds of algorithms. You can download it. It's all free. You can download it, and they're very good PDF documents. You can read it very easily, not like this because I'm speaking, so you're not able to read. Now, just a word on the ACLS cardiac arrest algorithm for suspected or confirmed COVID-19. Just because we are sitting with COVID problem, I just thought maybe it is nice to have spent 2 minutes on this. Do you all have this algorithm pasted in your hospital and all of you are trained? Yes, no, chat box? Do you have this algorithm pasted in the hospital and all of you are aware of this? Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Let me see the chat box. Okay, yes. Very good, very good. Okay, fantastic. And if it is pasted, at least get oriented also to that. I am very sure the orientation would have happened because our lives are at risk. So the recommendation, the first one, the yellow boxes are the ones which are very important. Limit personal and consider resuscitation appropriateness. That means you have to put the PPE. Nobody is saying that don't wear. and jump into resuscitating the person. This is where the algorithm that's different. Now here the algorithm changed that prioritize intubation here rather than doing bag mask ventilation. They're talking about posing chest compression for intubation. If intubation delayed, consider supraglottic airway or bag mask device with filter. Very important that you have a filter so that you are protected from the virus. Connect to ventilator with filter when possible. So if you have a ventilator, connect them to that. You don't have to manually bag them. So these two areas is where the algorithm is differentiated for COVID-19 suspected or confirmed person, so that you are not risking yourself. So take a note of this, this link which is there, and if you want, you can do a screenshot so that you can go there and download all the algorithms that you need for your hospital. So you can actually learn from this one document. It's very easy, one by one, and all algorithms are complete by itself. They don't say refer to something else. They don't say that. So a very good way to learn and teach others is with algorithms in place. Okay. Great. Let's see what is the next bonus that I have. Okay. I stumbled upon this document when I was learning to do this class. So I have to spend hours of reading and understanding to bring all this, information in one place in a simple manner. When I came across this, I thought this is something I must share with you. This is from the Journal of Anesthesiology and Clinical Pharmacology. This is the COVID-19 recommendations, and they are suggesting some modifications. I am very sure that some of your hospitals already following this. Okay. So one is that they are saying that what AHA and European Council, as I told you earlier. Where is my pen? Okay, it's here. So decision making, UK and AHA, Resuscitation Council, UK AHA, they say do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation orders before attempting CPR. Okay, that means look for. I mean, whether there is a DNR. In India, DNR is not yet official. So what they are saying ki every suspected or confirmed COVID-19 patient deserves CPR. There is nothing called DNR for COVID patients. So take all safety precautions, but do resuscitate the person. That is this particular group is recommending. What I thought was a good thing that I saw here was that cover the patient with a transparent plastic sheet to prevent aerosol spread. CPR can be performed wherever the arrest occurs. That means you just spread the plastic sheet. Anyone of you practicing this? Chat box? Anyone of you practice putting this plastic sheet on top of the patient during the resuscitation? So this is, there are a lot of recommendation, level 3 PP we want. Apart from all this, what they are saying, ki just, suggest, modify plastic sheet on top of that. It's like when you are having, patient arrest outside, you are going to resuscitate a person. You are wearing mask, but put something on the patient's mouth so that the breath of the person is not coming on you by any chance, whatever is that. So there is a barrier that you are creating by putting that. So let me see if I have anything in chat box. I'm just trying. If there is a chat box, something. Anybody using plastic sheet? I'm not in hospital, so I'm trying to say. Oh, some of you have. I think you have message now only. Yeah. Yes, that's a good practice. That's a good practice. So all these things are happening because I'm sure the doctors are also aware of this, and they are definitely recommending rescue CPR. That means do not tire one person, because if you are tiring one person because you want to limit the number of people giving CPR, if you don't rotate people, then you will be actually giving ineffective CPR because you are tired. So if you are tired, then why are you giving? Then oxygen supplementation to be given. This is, nasal oxygen at least at the rate of 5 ml per minute should be considered, because AHA had told about avoiding high flow nasal oxygen. This is what they have told. And UK has told oxygen supplementation only if readily available. So what this anesthesia pharmacology organization is telling, at least give 5 liter oxygen. Don't take, we will not give because this patient is COVID-19. So I think this is a good thing to do that. And definitely they are emphasizing that when you do a bag mask ventilation, always use two hands. Do not use one hand and start, bag mask ventilation, and always use a barrier. You can use a filter, or if you don't have, just cover the patient with a transparent plastic sheet. And video laryngoscopy should be the first choice. I was told by someone that this has become quite popular after COVID-19, that a lot of people are using video laryngoscopy, so that your aerosol, exposure is much limited. So you don't, and or you can use those plastic boxes. Some of you may be having it where when you do intubation, put a plastic box so that the aerosol is trapped inside that box only. It is not going to interfere also with the chest compression. Then using disposable paddles for defibrillation. I have not seen this in India at least, so I don't know. Any one of you using disposable defibrillator paddles? Unless you have those AD pads, that you are using. Any one of you using now? It's quite expensive also if you start using for every patient, but you can use once and leave it there till the person is resuscitated. Okay, you're not okay. Most of the advanced defibrillators, they do have cable for using this disposable paddles also. It's just like your AD pads, even defibrillators can get pads. So if you put the pads, that means you are not handling the patient, you're not going near the patient to say stay clear and shock the person. Do it little remotely. So that's why the recommendation for paddles. So there are some good, very practical, advice given by this anesthesiology and clinical pharmacology group. And then caregiver CPR. Encourage, instruct, supervise patients' caregiver to start CPR. Now, I think this is going to be a pretty major challenge. I think in most of the private hospitals, we do not allow the caregiver. So what they are saying is, if it is required, you can train the caregiver to just give, wear the mask and start giving the CPR, because they are already very in close contact with the patient. So we can only know whether in government hospitals are they planning something like that. We can't talk about that. So one person can be allowed. These are some practical recommendations given by a particular body. Okay. So I have taken only part of it. Recommend only facilities, transport, at treatment can be considered if prolonged resuscitation is needed. So that is for mechanical compression device. I have used this many years ago when I was abroad. This is actually a machine that you get. You can put, it's almost like you have the C clamp when you are using the C clamp for your femoral artery compression. It's something like that. There is a manual machine that you can put on the patient and it will continue to compress. It's not, when I used it, it was much, much early, but we stopped using it because we found it was taking more time than we doing the better efficiency. So we kind of gave it up. Of course, ECMO, and I am very sure that ECMO is being tried in advanced hospital centers. So that, of course, remains as a treatment facility. And I'm not going to get into core facilities now. Okay. So now let's see. There are some more small recommendations in that. I'm just showing some of them just for you to say how important it is to go back to that document. Look at that, guidelines document, the one that I have added now today, that document, not the part one, part two, part three. They are more in extensive language. But this guidelines, if you read all these things are from that book. So it's pretty easy to understand. There is guidelines for septic shock, choice of vasopressor and corticosteroid for pals. This is everything is about pals. So in pediatric recommendation, and there is also neonatal recommendation. Okay, so we have come to the last part of the class, and I would say thank you very much to all of you for being here. And I'm stopping my class over here, and I think as planned, I was thinking I should be finishing in about 90 minutes time, and I think we are exactly 90 minutes. And I really hope that all of you have benefited by being with me for 90 minutes. And if you have benefited, you can put in the chat box that did you find this class useful? If you found it useful, can you type how useful did you find on a rating of 1 to 10, whether it is 1, 2, 3, 4, how much did you find it useful? I try to make it as applicable to all nurses as possible. And what I will do, I'll stop sharing this and I'm going to run a quick poll. I'll just see if I can send you a quick poll. So if anyone wants to add something and say something, you are free. If you want to leave, there you are also free to do that. But please remember to get your certificate. There is a post test that I will make it live at about 6 p.m. So you come back to the same link, come and do your post test, and you can then when you get 80 percentage marks, it's not very difficult questions. All the things that we have discussed in the class, I've just put it together. About 15 questions are there, pretty basic. And if you get 80 percentage marks, you will get a download link for you to download your own certificate, so you don't need to ask me. So you have already reached the class, same like that you can go to the class and your post test will be available. It is not available right now because I have to make it live. So once you will get a notification on your email that it is available. So you can come there and do your test and you can get your certificate. So let me see your chat box, see how beneficial was your class. I'm just going to give a very quick survey question. You can just answer on your system itself, and maybe you can just answer that quickly. Thank you very much. You can just click how beneficial was this class for you. Very happy to see there are still 400 plus people in the class. Uh, I am grateful that all of you have come here, and I'm sure that at least some of you have taken one or two or three things to learn with you from this free webinar class that I have hosted. And seeing so many people in the class also encourages me that our nurses are really excited to learn something more about their practice and take something back. And my last remarks in the class will be that only please try to translate what you learned in your practice. That's very important. And most important thing, be so thorough with your BLS. Rest all things will fall in place, but be very thorough with your BLS so that you are able to give it back to your patients. This is very, very important. We are very thorough with our BLS. That is my personal request to all of you. Only when your foundation is strong, when you start building on top of it, and you will benefit more. So thank you very much. And well, I'll use this opportunity that we have a hemodynamic class, which is a paid class coming up on 15, 16, 17. It's a 6 hours class on 2 hours, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. If any of you are interested, and please, you can SMS me or you can write to me, our support at the rate signiahealthcare.com. You can write to that. And there have been a lot of my students are already here. They have already attended these. class, they have attended the mechanical ventilation. Now they are coming back for the hemodynamic class. So thank you very much. And I'm into the poll. I think about 170 of you already answered. So that's the, so I'm going to share the results so you all can see that. Oh, thank you very much. 70 percentage have told, good. Thank you very much. Very good for a quick update and a review. This is a very good understanding. I'm very happy that you found it useful. And some people did not find it very useful. That's okay. That happens out of 400. And 2 percentage did not find it very useful. That's idea is that we have recap the update here, and you're also going with where to find, and the three documents are already on the website, and the other document I have added today, so you can take. So thanks once again, and now allow me to stop the class and have a good day, and God bless you all, and continue to practice what you have learned, and see you back in one of our classes. We would be very happy, and also on our website. Don't have the document, how to access. If you come to the class, no, when you come to the class, you'll see the first two lessons and the three documents. Then there is another one I added today, that's the guidelines. So you can go there and you can download them because they are free there. So you can actually download them. So that's not a problem. So from the site itself, you can do that. That's not an issue at all. So coming back to that, our website, we are hoping to put up more training. Right now, there are few free two free classes are there. Pain management is there, that is free. Then we have I think one more the hepatitis deep dive, that's free. And then we have ABG lesson there, which is only 99 rupees, and almost 200 people have already trained. They come there, they take the lesson themselves. I don't need to be there in the class. So you have a video that you watch, and then you do your post test, and then you can get your certificate. So people who are interested in upgrading themselves to stay current, and please check with us, Signia Healthcare Academy. And those who know me personally, you will always come to know. And if you want to know what is happening in Signia Healthcare when it comes to training or classes, you can always follow our Facebook link, Signia Healthcare Services. In the Facebook link, you will find what is the latest. If you want to be part of the WhatsApp group, just let me know. I'll add you to that and ensure that you get all the information. So once again, thank you very much, and God bless you, and take care and be good to your, stay safe. And yes, this is the last month of December, so very happy year end and a beautiful Christmas and a very happy new year to all of you. Thank you so much. God bless you. Bye bye. We still have 400 people in the class. I'm very happy. I'm so grateful that you have come here and heard me for this 90 minutes. Thank you so much, and take the knowledge with you. And this is free. It will continue to be there. And come back and watch this video. I will upload this video also. So you can continue to watch the video, take the test, download the certificate, inform more people to come and avail this opportunity. Okay, great. So that's it for today. And thank you very much, and take care, and bye bye.